I want to welcome you to Torah on the Go. Whether you are walking the dog or working out or taking a break from work, we are glad that you have decided to take a few minutes out of your day to study Torah with me and my podcast buddy, Rabbi Ed Feinstein.
Glad to be here.
We here are finally about to talk about the Ten Commandments, the pinnacle of spirituality of our Jewish experience, perhaps. And we have only a couple episodes left to build up to that moment. So let's begin this run, this arc, by talking about Exodus chapter 18, Moses and his father-in-law. All right, so in the last book of the Torah, we talked about Jacob and his father-in-law, Lavan, and that relationship didn't go so well.
Not so good.
Not so good, right? That's not the paradigm of in-law that we're all supposed to emulate. Here, I think the Torah, it's fascinating to me that before Moses walks to Sinai and ascends and receives the Ten Commandments, experiences divine revelation, Moses has to meet a teacher. He has to experience what it is to receive advice from a mentor. There is such a person, and it's not from within the Jewish people.
Right.
Yitro is the name for this entire parsha of these next few episodes. We're going to talk about the Ten Commandments experience. It's all contained within this parsha that's named after Moses' father-in-law, Yitro. Mm-hmm. How do you make sense of it?
He's the chief priest of Midian.
That's right.
So poor Moses is a fabulous shepherd. When it comes to leading sheep up and down a mountain, there's nobody better. Jews, not so much. And what happens is Yitro meets Moses in the desert with his wife and his kids, who have been separated from him during this drama. Yitro has heard about what God did to Egypt, and he sees his son-in-law, Moses, the great Moses, exhausted because every problem comes before him. And Yitro realizes that his son-in-law may be this brilliant prophet of the Lord, but he doesn't know the first thing about organizing a people and leading a people. Yitro, who is a veteran at this, he's been leading his people since he was a kid, teaches him how to, basic organization, basic management skills, leadership skills, delegation of leadership, delegation of responsibility and authority, organization. And what's remarkable, I think the deeper question here is we're about to get the Ten Commandments. We're about to hear from God. But what the Torah is trying to say right away is that we don't have a monopoly on this. We don't have a monopoly on wisdom. We don't have a monopoly on truth. We don't have a monopoly on knowledge. There is something to be learned from every people in the world. And the openness to outside learning is going to be a very interesting controversy within the culture of the people of Israel. The Torah takes a very strong stand on this. It points out that here is the leader of the Midianite people, the chief priest, who may be, a big idolater in his own practice, but he knows something that we need to learn.
And actually, the Hebrew Bible, it vacillates, depending on the book, whether or not this is a good idea for Jews to encounter and accept advice from foreign peoples.
Right.
But there are many voices and many books in the Hebrew Bible that take this position, that take the position that there is wisdom in the outside world and that we're supposed to be open to learning new things from other people. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you study Jewish history, I would say that by and large, when things have gone well for us, we have remained relatively open to the outside world.
Right. So my history teacher at seminary was the great Gerson Cohen, who was also the chancellor of the seminary. And Gerson Cohen in the 1950s wrote a very controversial essay called The Blessings of Assimilation, where he said, exactly as you stated, that the best of us is the stuff that we entered into dialogue with outside cultures, assimilated the very best of the cultures in which we lived, rejected the parts that were undigestible, as it were, for Jewish monotheism and Jewish practice. So Gerson Cohen was an expert on Spanish Jewry of the Golden Age. Right. Talks about how we learned poetry from the Arabs. We learned science and astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy from Muslim culture. In Europe, we We learned certain other canons. We learned Yiddish, for example. We took German and turned it into the most Jewish of Jewish languages. And we've learned food and architecture from the cultures in which we've lived.
And, in addition to the Spanish Golden Age, the Talmud that we colloquially refer to as the Talmud, even though there are two Talmuds, most people refer to the Babylonian Talmud as the official Talmud, which we clearly developed in diaspora, and certainly our own experience today, American Judaism. I mean, it is the flourishing of a robust diaspora experience. Perhaps Jews here can't even comprehend that we're in diaspora because of how comfortable we feel here.
So the question, of course, is, as our culture faces an outside culture, what is enriching to us and what is destructive? Will we be having Jewish Christmas trees 300 years from now? Probably not, because that's a symbol that is derived from another faith community. But the fact that we've taken on, for example, the canons of democracy and made that part of our culture, our internal culture, that certainly would be something that has enriched us over the generations. And Yitro is a symbol of this ongoing conversation with outside cultures.
So one of my favorite verses occurs here in this meeting, in this encounter, right? Just as you said in the beginning, Moses comes up and Yitro is there. Actually, the text kind of shows us that Yitro is already with his daughter Tzipporah and the two sons. And Moses' two sons are already with Yitro. And Moses walks up and tells Yitro this entire story of everything that God did for the Jewish people, the plagues and the parting of the sea, and how and the text wants us to read and how God saved them. That's the last phrase. This is one of my favorite instances of modern Hebrew in the Torah. The word is vayitzilem otam, and God saved them from the Hebrew word hitzliach, right? So lehatzil, I should say lehatzil, not lisliach, lehatzil, to save them. But I read it like modern Hebrew, vayetzilem otam, that God takes a photograph of Moses and Yitro together, right?
Nice.
There's like a cosmic photo. They're getting along so well, the two of them, that God comes and snaps a picture of this meal that they're enjoying, the story that Moses is telling. It feels to me like this archetype relationship of Moses and Yitro in so many ways holds out a promise for father-in-laws and son-in-laws.
Right. That's best.
That they share Tzipporah in common. They also share leadership in common. They share their professions in common. They share
grandchildren.
They share grandchildren. They have a lot of interest, the two of them.
Right.
And we don't see a healthier version of father-in-law, son-in-law than Moses and Yitro in the entire Bible.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful way to put it. That's a lovely way to put it. The other thing that it does, I think, is it informs us about, it's a picture of how the outside world sees us. It would appear in the story that Yitro, because he's the priest of Midian, and the Midianites are a nomadic tribe. These are people, live on the caravan routes. He's heard the story already. I mean, like the gossip, the rumor about what the God of Israel just did in Egypt has gotten to him already. And he's talking to Moses, and you get to see how we look in the eyes of the outside world. And that's such an interesting thing, because sometimes we assume the worst of people. And sometimes, unfortunately, they fulfill our expectations. But on the contrary, sometimes we discover that the outside world sees us with tremendous admiration. I remember when I went to college, it was like the first time in my life, I'm living now full-time in a non-Jewish environment, far away from home, in a college dorm full of people of every background and every culture. It's California, mostly pagans, of course. And I'm living as a Jew. I'm calling my mom on Friday night and going to the Jewish community for Shabbat, and people know that I'm Jewish and I'm involved in Jewish life. And I remember at one point having this wonderful conversation with one of the people I was living around, who said to me, you have identity, and we're so jealous that you have identity. And it never occurred to me that way. I always thought maybe being Jewish was kind of parochial, kind of narrow and isolated. And they said, no, we admire the fact that you come from a place of security and identity. And that's something that the rest of us are struggling to find in our own lives. You've already found it. Yitro comes and tells Moses, the world admires you, and the world is moved by what just happened. A band of slaves rose up against the most powerful ruler in the world, declared their independence, ran to freedom. It's remarkable who you are.
Right. and Yitro in some ways means more of him.
Yeah.
The muchness of him.
The Hebrew word. The
Right,
Hebrew from yeter, yeah.
Right. The question always that you have, if you study all the meanings of the different names in the Torah, is he is the muchness or he is the more of what? Of who? Of who? In this case, it could be Moses. It could be, leadership. It could be, but Yitro certainly directs Moses in the right direction. I always think to myself, Yitro is the foreign leader that watches over Moses. I don't know if people realize this, but Moses, his portrait, I don't know how accurate it looks, but there's a rendering of Moses that actually is on the wall of Congress in the hall in Congress where the representatives gather. And I think that there's something profound about his leadership, about the acknowledgement of him as a leader in the world. And there's something that I think we share as learned Jews, as we recognize that was instilled with him perhaps from birth, that he had a certain quality about him. Perhaps it's relationship with God, but also some of it has to be taught. Some of it has to be taught, and therein lies a certain hope for all of us.
And what's wonderful is that he it's a practical wisdom. How do you organize an enormous people? How do you solve their day-to-day problems? And how do you create a structure in which leadership can filter through the entire people? And what he tells Moses is something that's really difficult for leaders, especially leaders like Moses who are inspired. Because inspired leaders want to stand on the mountainside with their staff in their hand, just like Moses, I have truth. And what Yitro tells him is, you got to trust these other people. You have to empower these other people. You have to share your gifts with these other people. You have to spread this out. In other words, your job is not to be the only one. Your job is to make yourself, actually it's a self-destroying, self kind of dissolving kind of leadership. You have to create a community of leadership within the people, which is so powerful that they, in the end, don't always need you. That's really hard for leaders to do. It's a really hard thing for leaders to let go of attention, of authority, of responsibility, and let other people lead, other people drive. Shelby driving yet?
She's got her permit,
and so you're gonna discover this Yitro moment,
I have.
brother.
It's terrifying.
To sit in the
that's right.
passenger seat and say, "Okay, go to the corner and make a right."
No, so we've done it. We've done it. We've been through the Ventura transition, the 101 transition. We've been through all these transitions together.
It's such a wonderful metaphor for parenthood.
Yeah,
because it's the same process. At some point, you're going to have to trust the kid.
Right.
At some point, you're going to have to turn over authority to the kid and say, "You drive. I'll sit here biting my lip, but I'll sit here and and that's what Yitro teaches Moses how to do. Let the people lead themselves. Believe me, they'll be okay," he says.
Well, we're awfully glad that you decided to share this driving experience with us. All right.
If you see the Leibowitzes on the road,
that's right. Stay away.
Pray for Brother Rabbi Nolan here, because
stay away right now.
She's a very responsible kid. She's a very responsible kid.
Best.
But stay a car length back and pray for Nolan.
we every single member at VBS had advice to give me, and this is one of the only times where I listened so carefully to each piece of advice, because this is a universal moment that every parent has been through. And
I let my dad teach my kids how to drive.
I was just going to tell you that my parents are so much more patient with her.
It's exactly right. Yeah. Grandparents, no problem, because they're not going to yell at the kid.
No, absolutely.
I had to let my dad say, "Dad, take the kids, teach them to drive."
Yeah, no, she loves to drive, my parents. Well, on that note, we look forward to studying with you next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Take care.